That's okay. When I watch it online, you can't hear anything that's going on back here.
Yeah.
Okay.
The mic's on this end, and quite frankly, the audio coming out of the recording is not great. But yeah, so.
Yeah, it tanked.
All right, well, welcome in. I'm going to say the thing that I say regularly that has not yet ever been true, but chapter 2 is not that long, so who knows? This might not go the full hour and a half unless you all have questions and things like that. But we will figure it out. Yes, Jonah is where we are. No, all good. So last week we kind of saw this initial interaction, right? God calls Jonah to get up, arise, and go to Nineveh to preach God's judgment against them. And instead, Jonah does the opposite, right? He arises to go down. And we see him go down to whatever that port was. Joppa, thank you. He goes down to Joppa, then he goes down into the boat, then he goes down into the hold, and eventually he's thrown down into the sea, which is where we left last week, right? Seeing kind of this microcosm of Jonah's upcoming ministry in the pagan sailors, who, which is going to become the theme, or a major theme of Jonah. It is these pagan sailors who are, they are more receptive to God's messages, and they are more believing than Jonah is. And we'll see this, throughout the book, that the unbelievers that we expect to behave in the ways unbelievers behave are doing godly things, whereas the godly person, the prophet here, is the one who is behaving in an ungodly way, right? We talked about how Jonah was working in the northern kingdom. He's kind of a court prophet, one of the last of the narrative prophets, one of the last prophets to the northern kingdom, and how under the reign of Jeroboam II, Jonah would have been kind of dealing with a lot of evil in Israel, and yet he's unwilling to go to Nineveh. And of course, we discussed why Jonah might not want to go to Nineveh with the brutality and animosity of the people who are there. So any questions that remain? Jay, you good to go? You got the whole thing covered?
I have done Jonah before, but I love it.
All right. I mean, Jonah's a fun book. It's an interesting book, right? Because it does kind of play with a lot of these ideas that we tend to have, kind of turns preconceived notions on their head. I will say Violet has a 365 Bible stories book, and I was reading it to her, and so I went to Jonah, and I had to edit a few things because it got a few things wrong, right? But it did a pretty good job. But I think a lot of the times that we had retellings of this, whether it be this Bible story book or Veggie Tales, right? We tend to make Jonah a more redeeming character than potentially he is. Why do you think that might be? Why do we, at least in media and in retellings of Jonah and the way we think about Jonah, tend to give Jonah a lot of credit?
We know he was God's prophet.
Okay, so his status kind of helps him with that. He's God's prophet. Good. Anything else?
He got out of the way on. He's kind of.
So what do you mean when you say he got out of the way?
Well, whale spit him out.
Oh, the whale spits him back out. Yeah, and but then we see Jonah kind of going right back to his old ways after begrudgingly doing what God tells him to do. So in this book that I read the story out of, it ended with something like, and Jonah learned to love people or something like that. He learned that God's ways are better. He accepted God's forgiveness, something like that. And I was like, well, no, maybe, but we're not told that, right? Yeah, we're given no indication of whether Jonah ever, long term, learns a lesson here, or is faithful, right? we don't know if this is the end of Jonah's faith, or if this is the beginning of him deepening his faith, right? We don't know. Kind of depends on whether or not Jonah wrote the book, right? If Jonah wrote this, then I think he clearly learned his lesson. And I mean, an act of humility there, willing to write himself in as the antagonist of the story, to kind of draw that theme out. But we don't know that Jonah wrote this, right? He could have died in the desert right outside of Nineveh. It never left, right?
I thought it was pretty interesting, the sailors were trying to figure out who's gonna cause this. Yeah.
Yeah, we had that image from the Mummy, right? Of the guy just flipping through the amulets, trying to figure out which is the right god to be praying to. And I mean, they end up landing on the one true God. Obviously, Jonah gets involved in that process, and Jonah does confess God to them. And by all accounts, they are faithful and are believing, at least through the end of when we are encountering them. Again, who knows what happens after this? But they're making true sacrifices to God. They fear the Lord exceedingly. They're trusting in God, and so. Yeah, we do see the sailors kind of go from their pluralistic idolatry to worship the one true God.
In the end, they said, glad we got the right one.
I mean, they're definitely worried about that, right? Because they're really concerned about, they don't want to throw Jonah overboard. The book for Violet, they got that part right. Eventually. Yeah.
And just threw this guy over the side of the boat, and the hope that it would stop.
Yeah, well, so, I mean, right, it did. But I mean, I think contextually, from a historical perspective, we can kind of deal with this a little bit more, right? Mm-hmm. The first thing the sailors do is they make every effort to get to safety, right? And that doesn't work. So what's the next thing they do is they start jettisoning cargo, right? And we talked about how that's both a practical approach as well as they probably were viewing this as making a sacrifice to the sea, right? To appease. Because they do identify correctly that the storm is of divine origin, right? And who knows, maybe, right, every storm is from divine origin, and they finally got it right this one time, right? But the sailors in chapter 1 do correctly identify the divine origin of the storm. When it finally comes time, they've thrown the cargo over, and they don't know, the storm hasn't stopped. That didn't work. Then they gather everyone together and they throw lots, right? Which we discussed, and which is even a biblical method of God speaking to people, right? That's how pagans viewed it, and like I said, there's in the Pentateuch there are outlines for how the high priest is supposed to do this, to cast lots, right? We see the disciples casting lots to figure out who the replacement for Judas is going to be. This is not an uncommon thing, right? And so that the lot fell to Jonah, everyone there would have agreed, okay, this is Jonah's God who is angry, or this is a God that's angry at Jonah, right? We figured out the person, right? So now let's figure out, what did you do? Right? What did you do to tick off a God? And we notice that Jonah never says what he did wrong, right? He never admits what he actually did. He just says, I did something. God's mad at me. This is the God that, I'm a Hebrew. My God is the real God who made the heavens and the earth. And the sailors are nervous about this, right? And then Jonah fulfills his prophet role, right? As that intermediary. How do we solve this problem? Jonah says, throw me overboard. Right? The prophet of God has told the people how to appease the wrath of God, right? He's finally doing, in a little way, something he's supposed to be doing. But then even with all these confirmations about what they should be doing in their worldview, they're still not willing to do it. And they still try and save him until it comes to the point, right? They could not, for the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. It's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. It's almost, Jay, I would suspect, it gets to the point of, we're dead anyway. He told us to do this. He's going to be in the ocean in 5 minutes, one way or the other. We may as well finally listen to him. I mean, that's kind of the impression you get is like the boat is cracking apart, right? The water's all over the place, and they just go, well, we're all dead men anyway, right? God, don't be mad at us. And they throw him off, and then it goes calm, and they go, oh, we should have listened to him earlier, right? Shouldn't have tried so hard. But it's like the last time we're picking up a Hebrew prophet and getting on a boat with him. But yeah, so I mean, I think we can give the sailors some credit there, that they really do make a significant effort. And we can kind of see again this counterplay contrast with Jonah, right? Jonah to them is a foreigner from another land who worships another god, and they are willing to all but sacrifice their lives to try and save him and help him. Meanwhile, Jonah has been called to go to a foreign land, to people who worship another god. He's not even, we noted, he's not even called to save them. He's just called to tell them that they're going to die soon. That's it. That's all. He is just there to proclaim the law. And he's still unwilling to do that. Because not because there's a chance that he might be able to save them, right, like the sailors do, but there's a chance that will save them, right? The odds are kind of flipped, and Jonah's not willing to say, I don't want to risk that God, who is so merciful, will forgive these people. So with all of that in mind, and we haven't even gotten to the final chapter where this all really gets unglued, but why do we so often see Jonah as not like one of the heroes of the Bible, but he's so often painted as this, let's just say, sympathetic character, right? Why do you think that is? It's a question about human nature.
Isn't that what most of us would do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what it is. I think
I don't
that
know why a prophet would think he could flee God.
right. You think he should know better,
Yeah.
but I suspect that that people tend to go really easy on Jonah. Mm-hmm. Maybe because we learned about him when we're so little too. Because Jonah and the whale, it's a story that we tell little kids who can't like really analyze this stuff deeply. But I think it's also because we kind of see a lot of ourselves in Jonah, right? Yeah. I mean, we'll use the new current event since apparently this is a new thing, right? Can you imagine someone in India before the missiles went down going to those camps in Pakistan and trying to save them? Right? By the way, do you know that India and Pakistan are this close to starting a war? Ooh, another one, right? And that one's fun because they both have nukes. Anyway. Anyway.
It's a crazy world we live in right now.
Man, it's wild. But I mean, right, like that level of hostility. Or, can you imagine someone from Palestine going to Jerusalem to go try and save some people in Israel? Right? Or a Ukrainian going to Moscow to save Putin's life, right? I mean, I think we ourselves can see how hard it is, right? Or, I mean, when I was growing up, the classic example was, would you be willing to be a missionary to the Taliban or Al-Qaeda? Would you be willing to go to their camps and tell them about Jesus?
You'd be dead.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I'm sure Jonah's worried about that. Like we said, these are not friendly people he's going to. But, yeah, I mean, I think that we identify with Jonah far too easily to kind of give him the same, or to come down hard on him, right? I think it's on purpose. I think Jonah's meant to be a sympathetic character, and it's meant, right, because there's lots of unanswered questions, and there's lots of things that Jonah does that kind of don't have, the loose ends aren't quite tied up. That's intentional. You are meant, in the book of Jonah, the narrative draws you in to replace Jonah, to put yourself in his position and ask yourself, well, what would I do? How would I answer this question? How would I react to these things? And Jonah becomes a character that we can do that with fairly easily, I think. Of course, the parallel, we're going to see that the book of Jonah has an enormous number of parallels to Christ. We already saw one. What was our major parallel to the Gospels last week? You remember?
3 days.
3 days.
No, he's not in the fish yet. I mean, that's coming, and I talked about it. But in chapter 1,
Oh, he's asleep in the boat.
they're both asleep in the boat, right? Now, is it the same?
Storm.
No, we're doing the comparison by the contrast that are made there, right? So just like we would be unwilling to go to so many people, and just like Jonah is unwilling to go to people for fear of his life, for fear of forgiveness, right? We see that Jesus does the exact same thing, right? God doesn't call Jonah to anything he doesn't call Jesus to, except Jesus knows he has a death sentence at the end of it, right? He knows what's going to happen to him. Jonah, and remember, Jonah gets out of Nineveh just fine. If he was concerned about persecution, it does not happen. And yet it does for Christ, right? And so we see, it's one of those, well, thank God that Jesus is better than Jonah, right? Because we'd be in big trouble if the Father, I included sections of Paradise Lost in a sermon a number of months ago. And as I was prepping for that and reading, that's how Paradise Lost, the Jesus part of it begins. The Father kind of rises up and goes to the Son and says, "Get up, it's time, I'm sending you." And so the call of Jesus in this kind of imagined heavenly courtroom is much the same as Jonah. Get up, it's time to go, right? We need to go save some sinners. And we see very different reactions to that call, right? Jesus doesn't run away to, some other dimension. I don't know how it would work and all that, right? Some corner of heaven or anything like that. He willingly comes and sees his mission through without deviating, right? Good. Anything else? All right. Wonderful. Well, and look at that. See, I told you. I'm worried for nothing, right? So we did say that there's some differences as to where verse 17 of chapter 1 officially belongs, right? And again, remember, none of the chapters, none of the verses of the Bible are original to the author. Now, the Old Testament had an established tradition by the time of Jesus. The New Testament, when Luther was alive, there weren't verses in the Bible. There were chapters, but there weren't verses. Which is why if you ever read anything by Luther, when he quotes something, he'll say, what he actually wrote is like, as we read in Mark 3, and then you'll see some brackets giving you the verse numbers. Because we know what verses he's talking about, but he had no concept of verses because they didn't exist yet. Although they kind of did for the Old Testament. And of course, the Old Testament has half and quarter verses as well. We don't even touch that, right? But that's a whole different thing. So, where does Jonah getting swallowed up belong? The way I've chosen to do it is we're putting it in with chapter 2. Does it? Let's say you are the director of a TV show on the book of Jonah, right? It's 4 episodes or so, right? Where do you end episode 1?
Him getting thrown into the sea.
Right, yeah, so, okay. Do you end episode 1 with him in the sea or him in the fish?
I'd end it in the sea.
And, let's do this. And no one on the camera or on the podcast will know how you vote. Who would end it with Jonah being thrown into the sea?
Because
All
you
right.
got that suspense.
Well, you gotta get a cliffhanger. Who would end it with him in the fish?
Coming out of the water.
I was gonna say, him being swallowed by a fish in a show called Jonah is also a little bit of a cliffhanger there. All right, so we're sticking with this analogy. You, my friend, one of a kind, so you're gonna have to defend your position against everyone else, I suppose. You're a director. This is a creative choice you are making. why would you end it with him splashed in the water other than it's a cliffhanger, right? In the process of your storytelling, if you will, right? Why would you end it there?
I would end it because the sea calmed.
Okay.
And so then the big mystery is what's going to happen next.
So there's that suspense and mystery of what's going to happen next. An end there would emphasize God's control over the waters. It would emphasize that his judgment, perhaps. Let's assume we don't know what happens to Jonah, right?
It's a new scene too.
You can kind of put it in both ways, but yeah, I mean, I think it's a natural place to make a new scene. And it would emphasize, right, God's control over creation and his judgment and these sorts of things.
Because right when the sea calms, you can have a big shadow swimming.
Well, right, yeah. So this is like one of those, right? Jay's not getting off the fence. He's trying to end it both ways. So good. Why else, from a creative standpoint, might we choose to end episode 1 of Jonah before the fish? Or how about this? Why would we end it after Jonah gets swallowed by the fish? Why might we include that?
Jonah's problems are not over yet.
Okay, so maybe Jonah's problems aren't over yet.
Yeah.
There is still, and it's hard for us, right? There's still that assumption that it didn't kill him, right? But I think we're assuming that, right? Oh, well, here we go. Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah. Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. I think that is implying that he's not done, right? So good. What else might that ending of the episode kind of help us emphasize in the story?
There was going to be a life thereafter for Jonah.
Oh, so this might be hinting towards and emphasizing resurrection,
Right.
And grace as opposed to law, potentially, and these sorts of things. So, I mean, I don't have any great earth-shattering conclusion here, but just kind of trying to look at this and say, okay, how does maybe this is a good example here. How does the way we break up the Bible affect how we view it, right? Man, there was an example of this not too long ago. The gospel reading ended like 2 verses. It was this nice, happy-go-lucky gospel reading. And like 2 verses later, Jesus is fire and brimstone. You're all going to burn in eternal torment sort of verse. And I'm like, well, glad we ended there, right? So I don't have to get to the bad part, right? And that can really shape the way we're viewing things, right? I wish I could remember what the reading was, right? It can really shape the way we're understanding things. So, yes, the chapters and the verses are not original, and certainly the headings are not original either. This is, by the way, something that entertains me. I have no problem with it, but whenever someone is called on to read the Bible, when they do read the headings, I get it. It's words on the page, you read it. But to me, it always doesn't seem quite right. It's like that's like a footnote. You're not reading the footnotes as you're going along. Like I said, it's a personal thing for me. I know some of you guys do it. It's not something that upsets me. Otherwise, I would have said something when you did it, right? But I don't know. For me, it's always felt like the editors are putting interpretation of the Bible, which, trust me, I am so glad that there are headings. It helps me break things up as well. I'm not saying that they're evil. Keep reading them. But in the context of a study, I don't necessarily want the editors to give me those sorts of directions. I'd rather kind of do it on my own, take the text at its face value. Which is why when I hand out, like with Micah, I don't think Micah had headings. I think I took them out. I can't remember. Now I'm not confident about that. But anyway. So, good. We have Jonah swallowed up by the fish, right? Do we need to go over the whole taxonomy thing? Doesn't matter if it's a fish or a whale. We need to go over that again because I don't know. I really don't care. Right? They don't have biology textbooks, so it really doesn't matter. Tell you what. Do I have someone who's brave that will read all of chapter 2 in one go?
I'll do it.
Thank you, Jay. I saw it in your face. I was going to make you do it anyway at that point. So,
I have the ESV. And it says, Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish, saying, I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me out of the belly of Sheol. I cried, and you heard my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the flood surrounded me. All your waves and your billows passed over me. Then I said, I am driven away from your sight, yet I shall again look upon your holy temple. The waters closed in over me to take my life. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped about my head. At the roots of the mountains, I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you and to your holy temple. Those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope of steadfast love. But I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will pay. Salvation belongs to the Lord. And the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah out upon the dry land.
good. Vomited. That's
Can't get more descriptive than that.
there is, and it's the picture that's now being used on all the socials for this, and I put it on the cover of the book I made for the youth. It's this old school medieval style painting of Jonah being vomited out from the fish, and there are speed lines, right? I didn't know that they were this old in art. You know, like the lines you draw to indicate momentum and velocity, he has them as he's being rocketed out of the fish. Yeah, Lauren was concerned because it's also that medieval thing where he's naked, but he has like the robe that has very conveniently covered the things that need to be covered. But there's a lot of leg that's showing. She was very concerned. I said, no, it's art. This thing is the vomit. It's too good. Anyway, so it'll be on the screen on Sunday. You can check it out there. Good. So we have the prayer of Jonah. Now, is this in most of the stories? This is what drives me the craziest about all the retellings of Jonah, is that they more or less skip Jonah's prayer, right? Violet's book had, and Jonah prayed, and that was it. There was nothing about his prayer in there. In VeggieTales, Jonah gets a vision of asparagus angels that sing a song, and there's no prayer, right? Which, it's a cool song. Check it out. I'm not, trust me, I'm not knocking VeggieTales. I am saying that they have some exegetical work to do to get to the high level that we're at here. But VeggieTales is spectacular. In fact, after we were done with our Jonah study with the youth, we watched VeggieTales. And I made them do a comparison and contrast and say, you know, what's different? And they're like, well, there wasn't a worm that could talk in selling cheese curls. And anyway, high school is what are you going to do? So, well, so we'll start with the question that I was planning on ending with here. If I have a controversial take in the Bible, I think this is it. I think some of you have probably heard this take before. The question is, did Jonah survive while he was in the whale?
So did he die?
Did he die?
Yes.
Is the core question here. What do you think? I'm going to make you all raise your hands again. No one can see it. And this is a theme. We're running with it today.
It doesn't say.
It doesn't say he died. It also doesn't say he didn't die. And we'll get there, right? And I understand it doesn't say. And then Moses crossed the Red Sea and he did not die. And then he walked up Mount Sinai and he did. I understand that. But how many of you just would say that Jonah lived the whole 3 days in the fish? Raise your hand.
I'm the only one.
All right. How many of you would say that, no, Jonah, he bit the dust? How many of you are too scared to answer? So,
I can see both.
you're right. So here's where, right, if I'm making my dramatic decisions, Jonah gets swallowed by the fish, and then the heartbeat comes up, As Jonah's in the fish, boom, 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 and it slows down until it stops, right? Because I believe that Jonah died. I do not think he lived. In fact, I'm not 100% sure he was alive when he went into the fish. Parts of this is...
How did he pray?
Well, verse 5. We'll get to that. We'll get to it, right? Part of the reason why I think Jonah might have died even before he got swallowed is verse 5. The waters closed in over to me to take my life. The deep surrounded me. The weeds were wrapped around my head at the root of the mountains. He's at the bottom of the ocean, right? Now, they're not over the Mariana Trench, right? So it's not going to take that long to sink. But he's been down there a long time. So that's a big fundamental question, is how, if Jonah's dead, how is he praying?
We prayed before he died.
Or after he was resurrected.
Yeah. And I think neither of those are the right answer. I know.
Before he died, or
Steve, do you have an answer to what's left? You might with your
What's
wife.
left? No. Yeah, he was in limbo.
No, he was not in limbo. No.
No, I'm afraid.
Where does Jonah say he is when he's praying? He's in Sheol, right? Now, here's the question. Is he speaking literally or is he speaking figuratively? And this is not on the night when Jesus was betrayed thing, right? It's also not I am the door thing, right? We know what each of those are. This is a very controversial and difficult to determine if he's speaking literally or figuratively. Why? Why is it so hard? What type of literature is this prayer? What's the style? Yeah. You didn't, because it wasn't a day, it was a whole unit. And you hated it. At least everyone, when I had to do it in English, hated it. Not apocalyptic, right? Even though that one's, then it's really crazy, right? Actually, apocalyptic would in many ways be easier to figure out because we say, no, it's symbolic, right? We know what apocalyptic is. It's not literal. So it's not maybe.
Yeah.
This one's a little bit more ambiguous. And that's on purpose with the genre. You guys are scared. You know this. Most of Jonah's words here are not his own. He is quoting a lot.
What'd you say?
A song?
It's a poem. It's a psalm, right? How do you know when the Old Testament in particular changes from narrative to poem? Yeah, this is an interpretive thing that is extremely helpful because we're not reading in the original language. If you were reading this in Hebrew and you knew Hebrew well enough in the culture, you would just know, hey, this is a poem, right? It's obvious when someone starts speaking a poem in English, you don't need the indentations. But in English, Hebrew poetry doesn't translate well. It's really, really hard because they don't worry about rhyming. Hebrew poetry focuses a lot more on rhythm, on repetition, on contrast, and on structure. And those are all things that are exceedingly difficult to translate. And especially with keeping the original words, right? This is why I remember in the Micah series, Micah has this big prayer where he says all these things, right? Tell it not in Gath and all this kind of stuff. The most poetic translation of that removes every word that's actually there, right? Because in Micah, he's playing on the names of towns. And the names of the towns don't sound like anything to us. So he says, this author, he says, tell it not in Tellington. Madison will have a mad son, right? That's what it's doing. That doesn't come across in English. And it's really hard to do that while keeping the actual words that are written down there. So what do the authors, or what do the editors do? Indentation. Yes.
So NIV says from inside the fish, Jonah prayed.
Yeah, well, that's where his body was. What verse is this?
1.
Verse 1. Yeah, so Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish, saying, right? So I'm not disagreeing with that. So it also, where is it? Where's the, yeah.
Okay.
Out of the belly of Sheol, so it's verse 2. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried and you heard my voice, right? What is Sheol?
Underworld.
Yes.
Hell.
Not hell. It's not hell.
Place of the dead or something?
Yeah, that is the simplest way to put it, because it also kind of leaves the ambiguity there, because
Is that no name for purgatory?
no, purgatory and limbo, not real things.
Okay.
So saying it's the place of the dead is really good, because that can mean one of two different things, right? Return of the King, Lord of the Rings, right? Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas are walking through the cave, and they hear a voice. This is a place of the dead, and the dead keep it, right? Who's there?
Guys that didn't do what they were supposed to do.
Oh, man, you're really nailing it. Yeah, the people who broke their oath to Isildur and all of that kind of stuff, right?
It is.
But why are they there? Does this make sense? I mean, they've been cursed, we know that.
Yeah, that's why.
But why are they there rather than somewhere else? I don't know if this makes sense. Why that cave? I'm asking this question in a much harder way. That's where their bones are. That's their graveyard. So in that sense, the abode of the dead, where the dead are, where is that?
Underground.
I mean, it's cemeteries, right? That's one way to take it, right? And one way that we can understand Sheol is just the grave. It's just death. Graveyards, that kind of thing. But there's also this other layered meaning on the term Sheol, which means where the dead are, where their souls are, if you will. And so there we have...
It's in limbo. They're in limbo.
No, limbo's not a thing, Jay. Limbo's only a thing in the Divine Comedy, which is a fantastic book. Or series.
There's stuff between heaven and hell.
No, there isn't. What? What's between heaven and hell, Jay?
The underworld.
No! No. So, and again, this goes to kind of the greater controversial views that I have, which, by the way, are not, this isn't me just making stuff up. I have people who are much more respected in synod and work at the seminaries and things like that, and have written really big, hard books, and some red books, and all this kind of thing. I'm not the only one who thinks this. But I'm also not, there are lots of people who don't think this. One of them happens to be your other pastor. This is one of these places where Pastor Jordan and I do not agree. I hate to tell him that he's wrong. He is. I'm right. And you know what?
Oh, you're online?
Yeah, there we go. I've been messing around with AI. I've gotten down a rabbit hole this week. And so I asked AI to write my sermon for Sunday in my style, and it did. And then I asked it for his style, and it did. And he was able to tell which one was which, because mine was longer. I'm dead serious. But they were different. Anyway, I then said, is Reverend Jacob Berlinski at Rivercliff Lutheran, or describe him as a pastor, right? And it said all this stuff. It's kind of crazy. It was very flattering. I get the impression that it's always flattering, and it's not like that dude is a jerk. But I don't know any jerk pastors well enough to ask them, right?
I do.
But it had. There you go. You and I, Jay. Yeah, I don't work for.
LCEF.
Thank you. I had an E at the beginning. I'm like, that's not right. Then I got lost. Yeah, LCEF. But then, of course, I got this glowing review from an AI. I said, "What do you think about Reverend Jeffrey Jordan?" And it had a lot less to say about him. It knew my church extension number. It said his extension is 201 or whatever. I don't even know what it is. I think it's 207, but it didn't have him listed on our website. I don't know how he managed that. Because I also asked it about Rivercliff Lutheran, and his name didn't pop up on the AIs. It's because I'm online a lot more than he is. I do podcasting stuff. I posted more things. That's why I'm much more visible to the AI than he is. So there's that, which means that I'm right, or at least that I'm going to win the argument. And then, quite frankly, I'm going to get the last word on basically all of our disagreements. because he's going to retire before me. Right? Right? I'm going to be here continuing to say things while he has retired. So I get the last word on all of our arguments. It's wonderful. I haven't told him this yet, Jay, so don't let him know that this is my plan, right? No, in all seriousness, Pastor Jordan and I do disagree on these points that we're talking, but guess what? That's not significant enough for us to have ecclesial differences.
Our own apocrypha.
That's right, yeah. Well, the problem is all of my Bible verses that support my view, he has other Bible verses that support his view. And it's hard, it really is, it's hard to sort them all out. Because admittedly, I have to kind of ignore or explain away some of his verses, and he has to do the same thing for me. But Jonah 2 is one of my big ones, right? It's also one of my big proof texts for the descent into hell. But that's a topic for a whole different day. I don't think we talked about it at all when I did the descent into hell class. So, in my view, right, what happens when you die? All right, hold on. I got it back. That's two. Yep, come on, Jeff. Okay. You'll be fine. We'll get you there. You weren't here when I did this in the whole thing. Jeff was. He already knows. He could teach this part. I talked about it so many times with Jeff here. Humans are, from a theological perspective, made of two component parts, body and soul. There are people who have the three-partite view, body, soul, spirit, don't care, not interested in that. That's a whole different argument, and I'm definitely right about this one. And I think Pastor Jordan agrees with me, although I'm not sure, but I have enough proof texts on this one. Humans, two component parts, body and soul. So, when you die, our theological definition of death is the separation of body and soul, right? Your body and your soul are separated from one another, therefore you are dead, right? Now, there's all sorts of medical things that happen to describe this as well. I'm not denying any of those, right? I'm just saying that my theological viewpoint describes death in a different way than medicine does, right? So, death, body and soul separated. What happens to the body? Goes in the ground, right? That's the simple way to put it. Obviously, we know that other things can happen in the meantime, but your elements return to the earth or the universe in some way, right? That's the law of conservation of matter and all that kind of stuff. What happens to your soul?
Goes to heaven.
See, no.
I know that's true.
And you're not fundamentally wrong. You're just not as correct as you could be, right? So here, let's put it this way.
Is it in limbo?
No, Jay, there is no limbo. You're messing with me now, and I know that you are. All right? I'm supposed to have a quiet, contemplative classroom. And this guy's over
I was
here.
going to say it's purgatory depending
Well, I can't.
on how many indulgences you require.
Anyway, for those of you who didn't hear the interaction that just happened on the podcast, count yourself lucky. So we'll put it this way. Is what happens to the body of the believer and the unbeliever different? No, all go to the earth.
Yeah.
Is what happens to the soul of the believer and unbeliever different in the moment of death and shortly thereafter?
Yes.
I say yes too.
Okay, so hold yours. What's different about the two?
Goes to heaven.
What was that?
Not yet.
Not yet. So, I am willing to accept these terms so long as we understand them properly, right? So, if we're saying that the souls are separated out into heaven and hell, that is correct technically. The way I envision this and the way I think the Bible discusses this is that when you die, your body goes in the earth. It doesn't matter if you're a believer or an unbeliever. Your soul goes to Sheol, whether you're a believer or an unbeliever. Now, Sheol is split in half, with a chasm in the middle, is the way it's described, that no one can cross, right? The believers go to what I term, just to avoid complicating ideas, is the bosom of Abraham, right? This comes from the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, where they are comforted by Christ. Jesus is holding you in your arms. You're in the presence of God. All of those things are true, right? Everything you think of about heaven is true. Everything you think of about heaven, given Hallmark and pop culture and things like that, is true of paradise, or, I mean, that's what Jesus calls it, right? Today you'll be with me in paradise, or the bosom of Abraham, right? We know basically nothing about the portion of Sheol that you might call hell or Hades, or you just have to split these terms up, right?
You're in the waiting room for hell.
It's a waiting room. They're both waiting rooms. It's, where are the angels?
Upstairs. With all the company of heaven.
Your soul is, this is hard for humans to picture because you have a body and you're supposed to have a body. That's how you function, right? Angels, demons, God are non-corporeal and do not exist in the material world in this sense, right?
Yeah.
So the question, where is it, does not make sense. Because there's no space.
Okay.
This is not the best way to describe it, but think of it as a different dimension.
State of existence.
It's a state of existence, right? And now we know that angels and demons are allowed to exist in this corporeal world. Ghosts don't, by the way. When you're gone until you're not gone anymore, and then everyone's not gone anymore. We'll get to that in a second. But that's where, so there's not a where. It just is a state of being, right?
Well, it says in the Hebrew Bible, it is located in the depths of the earth.
That's how it's described. I mean, Jonah describes it, right? I've gone down to the roots of the mountains, right? The reason the Hebrew Bible describes it that way, and why you described it that way, right? Heaven and hell, up and down, right? Is it has to do with a flat earth worldview. And kind of just a way of thinking of things. And this is extra biblical too. Like, this is something that, like, the Greeks are really big on this, right? When you die, you go to the underworld. It's down. Down is earthy and material and bad in their view, and most people's view. In the Hebrew Bible, the depths of the earth represents chaos. Represents separation from God, represents often evil, right? You can think of like volcanoes and stuff like that. We kind of conjure this image. Meanwhile, so what did the Greeks think was above the air, right? So the Greeks with the four humors, right? There are four elements, so the four elements, not four humors, those are slightly different. What are the four elements in the Greek worldview?
Earth, wind, fire, water.
Earth, wind, fire, water. Yeah, that's four. Here's a fifth one. It is almost never talked about, right? So the fifth one is the one that exists above the air, right? What's above the air? It's the ether. Well, we call it space.
Oh.
They didn't have that concept. They called it ether. That's the ether. This is where we get words like it's ethereal, right? It's kind of holy, mystical, otherworldly sort of description. That's where it comes from. And in the ether, there was no matter. And matter to the Greeks is bad. And so up there in the ether, that's where the good stuff is, right? That's where the unmoved mover is. The Olympians, when we're kind of earlier, they're the ones closer, they're further away from the earth, and they're closer to the heavens, right? Sky and heaven are the same word in both Greek and Hebrew. So these are human connotations. Down is bad, up is good. And so heaven is above us and earth is below us, is kind of the spatial understanding that gets associated with this. But, right, what's below us? Dirt. Keep going. What else? There's magma, and there's giant iron core, and then there's more magma, and there's more dirt, and then there's the Pacific Ocean. There's actually a website you can go to and you can drop yourself and it'll tell you where you pop out on the other end. And because the Pacific Ocean is enormous, basically everywhere lands you somewhere in the ocean. That's a factor of the Earth being 2/3 water, right? So then there's the ocean, and then what's further down? Oh, come on, guys, this should not be difficult for you. From where I'm standing, what's below the Pacific Ocean? Maybe this is hard. What?
Ice.
No, dirt's above the Pacific Ocean.
Ice.
Here?
Air. Good. What's below the air?
Upper atmosphere.
Upper atmosphere. Look, you got it. You got it. What's below the upper atmosphere?
Oh my goodness.
Oh,
Upper.
it's just space, right? You keep going down. It's space. Jay, are you tracking with me at all here? You don't look like you are. Okay.
Sorry.
Look, I have a circle.
I mean, below the water is air.
Yes.
Because
you're on the
opposite side of the
other
earth.
side.
Right, Jay. Look, you're standing here,
Yeah.
and we're going this way, right? Because that's down.
Yeah.
Through the middle of the earth, now we're coming out the other end. What's down from here? There's more space, right? Space.
Yeah.
So that,
Yeah.
So,
So you're in space at that time.
right. Now, of course, this is nonsensical because
Okay.
once you hit the center of the earth, then gravity will shift around.
Right.
And perspective will change,
Yeah.
right? But this is why this model of up is good, down is bad, just doesn't fundamentally, it doesn't work, right?
That's fine.
So, Sheol is non-corporeal, right?
Uh-huh.
It is the waiting room of the dead, the spirits of the dead. There's the good waiting room, which all of you are going to, don't worry about it. And then there's the bad waiting room, which none of you are going to, don't worry about it, right? What happens next?
We wait for Jesus to come.
The final judgment, right? Your personal judgment's already happened. You wait for Jesus to come. What does Jesus do when he gets back?
Raises
Creates
the
a new
dead.
heaven and
Who does he raise from the dead?
all.
Everyone. Not just believers.
No. All right.
Right?
Yeah, everybody.
The Sheol is
the sheep and the goats. Right?
emptied. Well, I don't know. That's an open question. But Sheol is emptied. The dead are raised, which, what does that mean from our theological perspective? If death is the body and the soul coming apart, what is resorection?
The soul and the body coming together.
Being mushed back together, right? That's from the Latin mush.
Yeah.
Soul and the body being mushed back together. Then we have the final separation, the public, mass judgment. Although you know where you're going at that point, you don't need to be worried during the final judgment. And then what happens to unbelievers?
The cast in the hill.
They are cast into, we'll just say, the lake of fire, Gennesaret, all that kind of, not Gennesaret. Yeah. Anyway, they're cast into the lake of fire.
Yeah.
What part of them goes to the lake of fire?
All of them.
Body and soul, right? What happens to the believers?
Heaven.
They ascend.
They ascend? No. No.
New heaven and new earth.
Bingo. You're coming back to earth. Where do human bodies belong?
On earth.
On earth. Now, this is not, if we go to Mars, that doesn't count. They belong in the created universe, right? In the material universe. So where are you going to spend eternity?
Garden of Eden.
In the new Garden of Eden, the recreated garden. On earth. It's going to be a new earth. It's going to be perfect. And you're going to be spending it with your body, right?
Hopefully lots of animals.
Now,
Animals, yeah.
if our animals are there, I don't know. I like to think so. But if there are animals there, I don't think is an open question. There will. There's a couple of reasons for that.
Right.
One of them, and you say beauty?
Beauty.
Yeah, I mean, it's appropriate for creation to have animals, right? Also, many of the prophecies of eternal life involve animals, right? The lion will lay down with the lamb. The kid will play over the den of an adder. And I don't think that those are just metaphors, right? I think it's intended to be taken literally. So for both of those, right? There will be animals. Now, like I said, whether there are animals or not and whether we get to eat them or not, that I don't know.
I don't think Rover will be.
No.
Yeah.
I don't know. That God's going to figure out.
Right.
So,
No cats out of it.
Yeah,
But you're,
they're going to be cats.
they just won't be such jerks, right? So, questions. Because, like I said, this I know is kind of not what most people have been taught most of their life.
So
your version is too hard to explain.
It doesn't fit on the Hallmark card, right? And so we ignore it. Now, of course, that's how we do theology, is it has to make sure we have to make sure it's not that complicated or difficult to explain and it fits on a card, right?
So you're saying we know he's dead because he said he was in Sheol?
No, we don't. No.
No, you're not saying
That is far more confidence than I have. I don't know that he's dead. I'm guessing that he's dead.
Okay.
Part of it is because he does reference Sheol. Just from Sheol I cried, I sunk down. He says a lot of things that imply death. Also, and this is a real gotcha moment here, right? Do humans survive inside a fish for 3 days? No.
I don't know. I've never tried.
I don't. Right?
But there was that guy that got swallowed by the whale. Did you see that video?
Yeah, then he got shut out the blowhole like 20 seconds later or something,
I
right?
don't think it went out the
Oh, it's out the. Oh, yeah, I guess the blowhole's a lot. It's way too small, right? Yes. So I'm not saying that you can't be inserted into a whale and then come back, but he wasn't there for 3 days,
No.
right?
3 seconds.
Yes. Now, I wouldn't want it to do that either, right? But so, and I know a lot of people have a problem with the book of Jonah and by extension the Bible because of this. They're like, well, how can someone live in the belly of a fish for 3 days? Someone asked me that. I said, he didn't. He didn't. He died.
Yeah.
Right? And then we have a bigger problem, quite frankly, which is
Digestion.
well, no. I'm not worried about that, right? Lazarus was in the grave for 4 days. He started to stink, and God managed that one.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about decomposition.
No.
No, the bigger problem is that he's not dead at the end of the book. And so now we've come face to face, not with the miracle of living in a fish for 3 days. We've come face to face with the miracle of the resurrection.
Yeah.
And so more to my particular point and belief on this, I'm going to get you all on my side eventually. That is far more in line with biblical miracles in general than being. Now, I'm not saying that God couldn't do it or that God didn't do it, right? But if we say that the Bible is a complete narrative thought, right, if you will, there's that, it's often described as there's the red ribbon, the thread that winds its way through the whole of Scriptures. A closer connection with that thread is a miracle of death and resurrection than just this, miraculous delivery, if you will. Now, what I will say is one way or the other, Jonah being swallowed by the fish and then spat back out is hinting towards resurrection. Whether he's dead or not, there's no way it doesn't play into that theme. But here's some other reasons why I think Jonah died that come from contextually outside of the book of Jonah. Well, one, how long was he in there? You guys know this.
3 days.
3 days and 3 nights. Like, man, that sounds familiar, right?
Nowhere in there.
We talked about Hezekiah in the class. He was sick for 3 more days. Like, well, I think there's a reason for that, right? So this is pointing forward. We have to. That's a red alarm, right? It's a shadow of the resurrection, and more than that, Jesus points to Jonah while discussing his death and resurrection. Right? The Jews ask him, what sign will you give us? And he said, no sign will be given to the sons of men, but the sign of Jonah. Right? And so we see just as Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days, dead, so too was the Son of Man, was Jesus in the belly of the earth, which Jonah also alludes to. I was swallowed by the sea and by the mountains and the root and all that. So too was Jesus dead inside the tomb, the belly of the earth, for 3 days, before the grave vomited him back up, alive, just like the fish vomited Jonah back up alive, right? So in my view, it fits the gospel narrative more closely for Jonah to be dead. It fits what we know about human physiology better for him to be dead. Now, like I said, this isn't me trying to explain away a miracle. In fact, I think that this is a bigger miracle than God putting Jonah into a coma or just having him just chill out there for 3 days and wait, right? I think the bigger miracle, I think resurrection's like par excellence for miracles. So contrary to me trying to explain this away, I think I'm making it worse, right? I'm lifting up the miracles. That's kind of the foundational position that I have. Questions on this? Like I said, yeah, hit me, Jay. By the way, if you walk out of here and you think, man, that Pastor Berlinski doesn't know what he is talking about, do not... Pastor Jordan thinks that. He thinks I'm crazy and that I am trying too hard. I think I'm right. But you can walk out of here and say, no, Jonah didn't die, he stayed alive, and we can do the rest of the class and it will change literally nothing else. But, go.
Okay. Since we're talking, you brought up the fact that Jesus laid in the earthly stomach.
The belly of the earth.
The belly of the earth. So what part of him went to hell?
I don't know, Jay. Let's
Was
think
it
about
his
this.
soul, his spirit? I mean, obviously his body didn't go because it's like...
So what happens? How do we theologically describe death? What happens?
Separation of
Separation,
soul and body.
Yes.
Separation of body and soul. Now, let's just do a little bit of Christology here, right? So, when Jesus died, which part of his body or soul did the divine nature stay with?
Oh my goodness.
Oh, yeah. That's,
It's not. You guys know this. I know that you know it. It just sounds
It was his
scary.
spirit.
Yes, but also no.
both.
Both. He is indivisible from body and soul. Jesus possessed a human body and a human soul, and both of them are hypostatically joined to the Godhead, right? This is basic Christology, second year of seminary, really difficult stuff that fails some guys. So, right? Come on, you guys got this. But no, remember, this was where a lot of those heresies came in. When they were trying to say, oh, well, Jesus, the body wasn't divine. No, the whole thing. So, Jesus, God and body, we'll just phrase it. Where does that go? This one's the easy one.
It went into the tomb.
Goes into the tomb.
Right. It lays there.
Jesus, God and soul, right? He's still there, right? Where does that go?
Sheol. Where all the other ones are.
Right, he descended into hell to preach to the spirits who were in prison, is what Paul says, right? Who are to preach to the spirits in the waiting room, to proclaim his victory to all who have died.
Does
So he
that
went to
mean
Sheol
that-
first and then hell.
No, they're the same thing. They're the same thing.
Sheol's hell.
Part of it is. The other part is paradise, right?
So does that mean that the people who are in the bad part
Right.
of jail, do they get an opportunity?
No.
Okay.
No. When you're dead, that's the last
Well,
chance,
that's what I always
right?
thought.
So that's why I think
So why? So
it's helpful for us if we don't use Paul's particular word of he went to preach to the spirits in prison, because that gives us the impression that he is evangelizing.
right.
That's not what's happening. Jesus is going down and blowing a trumpet saying, I won. I did it. Right? What was that? Yeah. Right, yeah. And everyone will know this. I think that's what's happening in the descent into hell. Everyone gets to know this, right? He's stomping on the devil and the power of Satan. He is proclaiming his victory, which is shouts of joy from those in paradise. Still Sheol, right? Those in paradise. One of them is the thief, who is on the cross, is now with Jesus, right, in his presence. And I don't know how those in the hell portion of Sheol would have reacted to that. But, I mean, not with joy, I would assume. And so, and then, right, Jesus is resurrected, body and soul put back together, which foreshadows what's going to happen for everyone in there, right? When the grave is emptied, the souls, just like Jesus, are reunited with their bodies, and Jesus is the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep and are resting in the waiting room in Sheol. Are you following me, Jay?
I am.
All right, I'm winning him over.
Yeah.
He's in trouble. He's in trouble. So, but you weren't the one that asked that. Who asked that question?
I did.
It was you. Okay.
Yeah.
So, right. So, are we?
Oh, we're in simpatico.
So, where was Jonah's body throughout this whole process?
In the fish?
The body never left the fish. The body until Jonah was resurrected. I don't know. Was he resurrected as he was being propelled? I don't know. But
Doesn't matter.
Jonah's body never leaves the fish. It's there. The fish is delivering the body, maybe the body and soul of Jonah, depending on whether or not they're still connected to wherever he got spit out. Right. Good. Okay. Like I said, this is big and crazy, and
It's heavy.
it is. So here's the thing, right? This is why don't we just keep the Hallmark version, right? Why don't we just say when you die you go to heaven if you're a believer, you go to hell if you're an unbeliever. We're done, right? Why don't we just leave it at that?
Good question.
So the way it was described to me at the seminary.
I like that one better.
Yeah. No, you don't. You don't. You think you do, but you don't.
It's easier to explain.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
Yeah.
The way it was described to me at the seminary, have any of you ever been hikers?
Hikers?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
hike the big mountains and stuff like that. So perfect.
Yeah.
Have you ever? I haven't done that. I've never. I enjoy hiking, but I've never done the mountains. Right? As you're hiking up the mountain and you're going, and you see the peak, and you get there, and it's not the peak, right?
Very frustrating.
It's the false peak,
Yeah.
right? But then have you kept going to get all the way up to the actual peak?
Absolutely.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah. The way most people nowadays, the popular understanding of heaven is a false peak. Yes, you're with Jesus. That's good. It's nice up on the false peak, right? Yeah, I understand there's frustration, but there won't be for you,
Right.
because, all that.
Yeah.
It's nice there. It's beautiful. You're with Jesus. You're at peace. The tears have been wiped away. A lot of those prophecies about what will happen to you have come true, right? You're in the arms of Jesus. He's holding you. You're in the presence of God, right? No tears, no sorrow, no hunger, no thirst. All of that's gone, right?
But you don't have your body yet.
But you don't have your body. And what I have been drilling into this class, and everyone I can, every chance I get, are you a person? Are you a full human if you don't have your body?
Full human?
No, you're missing something, right? And so Jesus did all that work. He died and rose again to forgive you of your sins. He's getting ready to recreate all things, and he's just going to leave you as half a person when he's done, right? That way you can be a floating little wisp that plays a harp on a fluffy cloud for eternity, right? That sounds nice, doesn't it, Jay?
No.
I can never ask that question if Angie's in the room, by the way, because that does sound very nice to her. So for people who aren't Angie, right? And you hear, I remember it was a bit of a inflammatory comment, but I saw a comment online once that was like, I don't want to go to heaven. Heaven sounds boring. I want to go out like a fighter and a murderer so that I can go. And this is more Divine Comedy, so it's like, I want to go fight people in the river Styx for all eternity. I'm like, that doesn't sound fun. But to this individual, and like I said, it was intentionally inflammatory. He wanted to get people online upset.
Sure.
But you get, if you listen to a lot of non-believers, you get that sense from them. That heaven does not sound that great.
Sounds boring.
It sounds boring, right? It's like, what am I going to do? It's not going to be interesting. I just got to sit around play my harp. If you're Catholic, I can stare at God all day for eternity, right? Which I do think there's an enormous amount of value in the understanding of the beatific vision. I just have a little bit of differences on the end point. But I do think, so for what it's worth, if you are familiar with the beatific vision and any of that, I do think a lot of the elements of that are true. But you're not just...
Let him swim in a lake of fire.
No, well, not to everyone, right? I mean, most people's concept of hell is it's just like a really sinful version of earth. And a lot of people really like sinning, right?
It's fine.
And this should sound insane to you, right? Because that's also not what hell is. Mm-hmm. But, that concept exists in the popular psyche. There was a show, it's a cartoon musical, it's extremely inappropriate, but really good, called The Has-Been Hotel. Amazon put it out about a year ago. And it's about Satan's daughter who's running a hotel rehabilitating sinners in hell with the hopes of getting them sent up to heaven. And she runs into a problem where people don't want to leave. Because people in heaven are jerks, and there's a lot of other subplots to this thing. And they like it there. Like, yeah, some of them are pretty miserable, but some of them are living large, right? They're gambling all the time, and they're always drunk, all of that kind of stuff. And so, I mean, just the existence of this show, and like I said, there's a lot of other storylines going on in that, but it goes to show.
I have a whole lot of really bad fun.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the idea is, now, granted, the characters do go to heaven and everyone's eating ice cream and is super attractive all the time and all that kind of stuff. It's very inappropriate, Jay. But it's pretty good. Anyway. But yeah, so I mean, this piece of popular media, right, kind of tells us a little bit about the culture that's willing to kind of hold on to that resonates with people. Let's have a lot of bad fun. Now, for what it's worth, that's not what hell is, right? People are sometimes surprised when you tell them that, who is the king of hell?
Nobody.
No, that's not true. That's what most people think. That's not true.
So what you said?
The devil.
God the Father is the king of hell, right? And you go, well, hold on. Right? Jay makes that face.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound right, does it, Jay?
No, it doesn't.
Well, God's in control of everything everywhere, and he creates everything everywhere, and he rules over all things, but not hell, right? He doesn't have power there, right?
Well, he does, but the picture of it seems like if he's allowing Satan to be the president or CEO.
But that's not what's going on. Satan's not the president or CEO.
Yeah.
What is Satan doing in hell? By the way, both Paradise Lost and the Divine Comedy Inferno get this right. What is Satan doing in hell?
Well, his job's over by then, isn't
He's just having fun.
he?
He's either brought a lot of people in.
He's suffering, right?
Exactly.
And
In torment.
yeah, he's being tormented too, right? In the Divine Comedy, he's buried halfway deep in the frozen Lake Kolkikis. And in Paradise, they're just like,
It just sounds like a musical.
yeah, well, it's supposed to, Jay. That's not right. And in Paradise Lost, he's like, he and all the demons are like languishing in this desert emptiness. Is kind of the picture that you get. But what they get right is that who is hell designed for?
Non-believers.
Unrepentant sinners.
No.
Oh.
The devil and his angels. Jesus is very clear. The Bible is very clear about this. Eternal, right? Eternal hell, whatever that last place for unbelievers is not designed for people. It's designed for the devil and his angels. That's their place. Not their place to hang out. It's their place of punishment, right? The prison was built for them. Now, there are humans that will go there, but it was not intended for them, right? They'll be thrown into the lake of fire, the place prepared for the devil and his angels, right? It's not for people, right? God desires for all to be saved. Jesus covered the sins of all, right? Now, this do not read those as kind of universalist sort of thing. Well, God loves everyone, so he's going to save everyone in the end. No, divine punishment is very real. And it's something that we don't need to be afraid of, right? But it should be a call to action for evangelism and things like that. And humans will go there, but they're not supposed to go there. That wasn't planned, right? That wasn't the design.
I think that was Groundhog Day. You know, the movie. You're tormented, wake up again, you get tormented again.
Yeah, I mean, and what
it
it looked, I mean, I think there's a reason that God doesn't really describe it, right? Moth and rust never die, or the worm never dies, moth and rust are always destroying. I mean, it's not good. Eternal fire, weeping and gnashing of teeth is bad, right? But like what the details of that are, we're not told, and I don't think we can really conceive of them, which is a good thing. Because I think it would be really problematic. But yeah, so hell is not intended for people. The devil is not in charge there. The devil is being tormented there. Now, I don't remember how we got to that point.
We're talking about him and the belly of
Jonah,
the fish.
did Jonah die?
Well, I know that part. I don't remember how I got on that tangent. Anyway.
But I asked about where, we said Jesus descended into hell.
Right.
So what part of Jesus went?
Right, yeah, just the soul.
And then we just went off on that tangent.
Yes. Now, there are some that talk about a bodily descent into hell. They kind of adjust the timeline a little bit. Lutherans don't believe this, at least as far as I have seen. We don't get a lot of details on this because the Bible doesn't tell us. But there are some people that say that Jesus doesn't descend into hell until he's resurrected. And then he just is back from hell by the time Sunday morning comes along. Because we don't actually know when the moment of the resurrection happened, right? We don't see it happening. We just see it already having occurred, right? Which is one of the things we don't do an Easter Vigil service. That's part of what the Easter Vigil service deals with. You celebrate Easter on Saturday evening in an Easter Vigil. It's beautiful service.
They said descended into Sheol.
Right, except Sheol is a Hebrew word. Right. Hell, by the way, is the word hell is also not in the Bible. Which I know you're going to be like, well, what's going on that? We just said the word in Greek is Hades. The word hell comes from Norse mythology. It only has one L. Yeah, Bill, in your Bible, the word hell is there.
NIV.
Just about any translation. But that's because they are translating words into words that we use, right? But like the Greek word is just Hades, right? It's not hell like we use the word, right? That's a word that comes from some cultural appropriation with Scandinavian mythology and things like that. But it means the same thing, but the word isn't there.
Right.
So, which makes this more complicated.
Is descend into hell first or second?
It's got to be first, because 2 Peter is antilegomena. Well, like I said, the word there is Hades. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm confused.
Okay, that's okay.
If God and the angels
Yes.
are down there, now, the thing is,
Right? I mean, demons are still flying around, for lack of a better term. But yeah, like God's overseeing it. Also, right, God's omnipresent, which is weird because hell's also the absence of the presence of God.
Yeah.
So how do we kind of square that? That's one of those mysteries, but and there are ways to kind of reconcile these things. But yeah, hell, or the lake of fire, let's just call it the lake of fire to distinguish a little bit here. The lake of fire is not a place where the demons are in control. It's a prison and eternal torment for them. That's not where they are right now, but that's where they will be after Christ's return. And yeah, God is, I guess a good word is God is overseeing that. He's in control of it. Yeah, right. I mean, it goes against all the cartoons that we've watched, right? Where the guy in a red skin suit and a pitchfork is having a grand old time. But so that's, I mean, does that make sense? Does that clear up the confusion?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I knew we wouldn't get through. I told you guys there was no chance that we'd finish this well or early. I don't know why any of you thought that. We'll take 2 points of the actual text here. I do encourage you to kind of go back and look through the prayer. It is Jonah quotes the Psalms like crazy, right? He knew the Psalms really well, and they're the prayer book of the Bible, right? And so most of what Jonah says is quotations from the Psalms. Not all of it, but a lot of it. Verse 7, let me make sure I'm correct here. Chapter 2, verse 7. When my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you into your holy temple. This is the center verse of the book. This is the center point, which in Hebrew storytelling and in Hebrew poetry and in Hebrew writing, that's something you pay attention to. And it really does exemplify a lot of the major themes of this book, right? This death and resurrection, calling on the Lord being merciful. And we see Jonah's confidence in his resurrection. And this isn't even a question of whether he's dead or not. Jonah is confident of his resurrection, right? Either he's already dead, that's mine, he's confident of his resurrection, or he's inside of a fish, and he's there for days. I'm willing to bet Jonah did not think he was going to make it out of that, right? He probably had no idea how long he was down there, right? Because people, when you lose all sense of the sun, humans are really bad at telling how time passes without the sun, right? And so Jonah's got to be convinced he's toast, and yet he says... verse 9. But I with the voice of thanksgiving will sacrifice to you what I have vowed. I will pay salvation. I vowed I will pay. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Jonah is confident that he is not done. He's not finished. That even while he is in this whale or even dead, that God is still with him and is still going to see him through this. He has confidence in the grace and mercy of God. And one way or the other, we can at least see, right? We saw that the storm was sent by God to bring Jonah back, right? And that the whale or the fish is God's way of delivering Jonah out from the destruction that he is causing for himself even, right? Because as he's fleeing, he's trying to get away from God. He's trying to flee God's presence. And in many ways, as he sinks into the water, I bet Jonah thought, I got you. Not going to Nineveh now, right? It's over. I win, right? And God says, no, you really don't. Right? But it's through the whale that God brings Jonah back into his presence, right? Whether it's, like I said, through his death or through just bringing him straight back towards Nineveh, right? The whale is something that God sends to deliver Jonah. And we'll see that God sends a number of things, right? He sent the storm, he sent the fish, he's going to send a plant, and then he's going to send a worm at the very end. And all of this is to call out to Jonah and bring him to God's mercy and grace. There's that. Was there anything else? Look, verse 6. I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. You brought up my life from the pit. He's dead. Okay. And by the way, the question that I didn't answer earlier, if he's dead, how can you pray? Guess what? You can pray when you're dead, because you're still existing, right? You're not going to talk to God while you're in paradise there, Jay? You're giving me a funny look. You're just going to sit there quiet and not talk to God anymore?
I can't picture it right
now. There is some... Right. There is some weird stuff, and you can go down a bad rabbit hole here and end up in the Catholic Church. Right? So a big part of the concept of praying to saints, at least in the modern context, it has changed over the centuries, even though the Catholic Church tells you nothing ever changes, right? Nowadays, at least most American Christians, or American Catholics specifically, would say, I don't pray to the saints so that the saints save me. The way it's been described to me by many Catholics is, Jay, I ask you to pray for me. Why can't I ask a saint in heaven to pray for me too? They're interceding for me. They're praying for me, right? Luther actually talks on this specifically when he deals with the prayer to saints in the confessions, right? Does anyone remember what Luther says about the prayers of the saints in paradise? We are never given any indication that they don't pray. We're also never given any indication that they can hear us. I believe that the saints are praying for us right now. All those who have gone before are praying for the church on earth, right? We know that they're interested, from Revelations, it's a little squishy, we know that they're interested in the plight of the church, right? You have the souls under the altar and Paradise Shale who are calling out to God, how much longer are you going to make us wait? And, right, look at the suffering in the world. Fix this, right? That being said, we have no biblical, and Luther even says this. He says, are the saints praying for me? Possibly. Probably even. Can the saints hear me when I ask them for specific petitions, maybe? We're given no indication, and in fact, Luther kind of says, you would imagine that paradise would never be paradise if people could constantly pester you with their problems. And so he kind of goes tongue-in-cheek that way. So is there prayer? Is there going to be prayer in the new heavens and the new earth?
Yes.
Absolutely. It's going to be way better than it is now. That's for sure, right? Is there prayer among the saints who are now waiting for the resurrection? I have no reason to think. Jesus is praying for us. We know that.
Yeah.
Right? He's before the altar of God, interceding for us night and day. We know that. And if he is there, if he is, right, in heaven, for lack of a better term, because it's really confusing with Jesus really fast. If he's praying for us, why wouldn't the other saints pray for us, right? That's something that is a thing God calls us to do, right? And so why wouldn't Jonah be able to pray when he's in Sheol, right? In fact, he's probably doing a lot better. This is a really good prayer. He does a pretty good, it made it into the Bible, right? But again, are the saints waiting, praying? Yes. Are they praying for the church? Yes. These are all, maybe not, but in all likelihood. We need to make sure we keep that guardrail up, though. Don't try talking to the saints. Don't try involving the saints. Don't petition them for intercessions. That is misunderstanding, quite frankly, what is an understanding of the universal church, right? Because we even talk about it in our liturgy, right? With angels and archangels and all the company of heaven, we join together in praising you, right? Our liturgy confesses that we are joined in worship with the church that has gone on before us, right? That's part of this mystery, miraculous stuff that happens on Sunday. Now, there's a wall there. We can't see across. Presumably, they may or may not be able to either. But I often will tell people, and I tell them this, and then it gets them really emotional in a very emotional part of their lives. So sorry. But when someone close to you who's a believer dies, go to communion because they're there. They're in your presence there, right? In a divine way, which, like I said, whenever someone comes back for the first time to church that I've talked to about this, after there's a death, they're just, most of them don't actively weep, but they're the whole time just like, I know it's coming. You're allowed to cry during communion, by the way. Like, you don't need to hold that back. It's okay. Jesus cried too, right? But that's where we connect, right? The church, the body of the church is more than just Rivercliff, which you all know that, right? We're the church across the whole earth. But we're also the church across all time. We're all unified in Christ. Same head, right? Same body. So anyway, I will tell you this. I didn't have anything about ecclesiology and the nature of the eternal church in my notes for today, but there we go. Any other closing questions before we go, before we vomit ourselves into chapter 3, which I shouldn't have said that right at the end because my wife might hear me say that and be like, Jacob, what is wrong with you? But we shall be vomited forth into chapter 3, but not before we pray the Lord's Prayer together. Like that transition, Jack, that was a good one. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory,